is that it could take a year or more to develop, test, and manufacture a vaccine for the clade X virus.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. You know, is the price worth it? That the price, we think the price is worth it?
Richie Brown Show.
So welcome, Roman, to the Richie Brown Show. Today we're going to be going through your book, Dissolving Illusions. It's an excellent book.
Thank you.
Couldn't put it down when I got hold of it, particularly given our recent events. I think it's an interesting one because you wrote it in, 2015, wasn't it?
2013 it came
2013.
out. I had worked on it on and off for 15 years, and then Suzanne and I worked on it together for 4 years. So yeah, so it's a while ago. And,
it must have
actually.
I mean, I'm not sure how much sales were at that period. Maybe. So I imagine for a lot of people that were reading it were mothers looking into the vaccination schedules, and they'd come across previous like autism and that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, when I published it, we had a party at my previous residence, and it's a small group of people, and I was just happy to be done with the project, and it was something I just felt I had to do. So we published it, and I thought, okay, I'm done with this whole vaccine topic, and we'll sell a couple hundred books, and the end. But since we published, it's been a slow and steady kind of increase. So over those 10 years, it just was always going out a bit, and people bought it and read it, and it's kind of just spread organically. We never really advertised. Suzanne went around and she was on the Vaxxed bus and did some interviews and things like that. But it was basically organic. I think people would buy it, read it, and tell their friends, and it just slowly spread around. And now it's kind of gone off the rails. So it's quite popular now.
Yeah, I saw Suzanne on Joe Rogan, and yeah, quite a breakthrough for you guys there.
Yeah. She's an amazing woman, and really brilliant. And she sacrificed her whole career to do this because she felt it was the right thing to do, not because she was going to make oodles of money. As a matter of fact, her high 6-figure salary went down to like 10% of that, and she had a real rough time. She if you go to these quackbuster sites, they're like, oh, she became a homeopath and became rich. Well, none of that's true. But she's just an amazing lady, and I'm honored to have run across her path. So smart, honest, hardworking, non-compromising. She says it like it is. So she can't be bought.
Exactly, yeah. That's a common theme in your book, isn't it? With doctors getting their careers destroyed for going against the inoculation / vaccination.
Sure. Yeah. Right from the beginning, when they started doing this, if you went against the grain, against the majority, you were basically usually just ignored. You just didn't want to do that because you lost your finances because you were getting paid good money to vaccinate. This is like during the 1800s. And then you would be called a crank, which is the equivalent of anti-vaxxer today. And so you lost everything if you went against it. And so anybody that did really kind of suffered. And because it was a very profitable, it was a very societal-wide belief in doing this. And, you had to kind of really want to stand up and tell the truth. And what's interesting is it started almost right away when they started coming out with this idea in Jenner in 1798. And it really took off by the year 1800. And there were people in 1805 and 1810 and all the way through the 1800s that wrote books on how the vaccine was not working, how it could kill you. And but they still kept it going. And then this instituted laws, put them in place in 1840, 1853, and then they had a harsher law in 1867. In that law, you had to get your child vaccinated by 3 months of age. And it's not the vaccine that you might think it was. It wasn't this hypodermic needle being injected. They would take a sharp instrument called a lancet, which is just a sharp knife, and you would cut yourself repeatedly. And they would take this mystery goo and smear it into your arm. And that's what a vaccine was. And you would go through the vaccine disease. And sometimes it was quite harsh. Sometimes you didn't survive. Sometimes you would get this scarification, which if everything went right, you would get these like 5 scars, which would prove that you were vaccinated. So that was your original vaccination card. And then if it went wrong, you could get a big sore. It would open up. And it was quite dreadful. Some people died horrible deaths. Not to mention it was tied to tuberculosis and many other diseases too. As you might imagine, if you take some kind of material with pus and bacteria and funguses and you smear it into somebody's bloodstream, well, it's probably not going to, do too well. So,
Yeah, in your book, you've got many examples of them doing that and then spreading the disease itself.
yeah, if you're going to take this stuff, which was originally called cowpoxing, but it wasn't, Jenner really thought it was from a horse. So he thought it was from this disease called the grease on horses' legs, which got transferred to somebody's hands and they got it onto a cow. But they also use goats. In India, they use buffalo. They use donkeys and mules, any of these kinds of animals that they could create these little pustules. And they would take that stuff and put it on somebody's arm. And then they used arm-to-arm vaccination for 100 years. And it was eventually outlawed in 1898. So for 100 years, they would take it from one person's arm to another person's arm. And that's how they vaccinated people. So it's not this like, oh, I took it from the cow and we, just kind of like these lovely pictures that they show when they show Edward Jenner, doing these kinds of things. But it was quite a harsh type of thing to do. And by the end of the 1800s, they discovered, gee, we're looking at our microscope and there's all sorts of bacteria here and fungus. And back when they first started, they just called it a vaccine virus, and that they would use this vaccine virus to protect you from smallpox, which of course it never really worked. But it was a harsh combination of all these different microbes and blood, and you would smear that into somebody's arm. And if it, depending on the skill of the practitioner, if you went too deep, you would get more of that stuff into your blood supply. So it's not surprising that you would get all sorts of different conditions. Erysipelas was a horrible skin disease, would start from that, or tuberculosis was, greatly tied to this kind of thing. And so you had all these different things, sepsis, which is not a big surprise. So people suffered and died or were, deformed or crippled for life. But this is kind of what vaccination is based on. And, originally called cowpoxing, they had to, let's make it fancy. We'll take the word for cow, change it to Latin, which is vaca. Now it's vaccination. So it sounds more official, sounds more medical, right? So, but the whole thing has been kind of, insane, really. So from the beginning.
Yeah, you've got an excellent quote in your book there. I'll just read it out. Those who have had to take detailed notice of the immunization accidents of the past few years know that to get to the truth of what really went wrong generally calls for the resources of something like the Secret Service.
Right.
Definitely feeling that after 2021.
Yeah, it's there have been really smart doctors over the years. Dr. Crichton, he was tasked with writing an article in the Encyclopedia Britannica in the 1880s, and he didn't just say, "Oh, okay, let me just put down the talking points into the article." Instead, he did some research because he was a researcher. He had written books on the history of Britain, so he's a smart guy. He basically lived in the library, and so he looked into it and he wrote a rather not complimentary article in the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1888. And in there, he exposed all sorts of negatives of vaccination. And he ended up writing 2 books on it, one on Jenner and one on syphilis. And those books were, not too kind to Edward Jenner and everything that went on. So, but he did the research. He was a smart guy, and but didn't really seem to matter. Well, it did matter because vaccination started to fall out of favor by the end of the 1800s and basically plummeted. So by the mid 1900s, vaccination was no longer being used for smallpox. But he ended up, just kind of forgotten in history, and I think he just was, left on the side and ended up a poor guy. He didn't succeed financially, but he did the right thing. So you don't always end. It doesn't always end very well for you if you go against the herd.
That is something that occurs again and again in your book, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anybody that went against it, they would suffer the consequences of it, or at least just be ignored. Even in 1805, Dr. Rowley, he wrote a scathing book, Smallpox, No Security Against, Vaccination, No Security, Cowpox, No Security Against Smallpox. And he was very clear about it. It's like, it's not working. But, because Edward Jenner had claimed that it was perfectly safe and that it would protect you for life. Of course, he had no basis for that. He just simply made it up. He may have believed it. I have no idea what was in his mind, but there was no way he could actually say that. He did a smattering of cases. And because of the way they tested it, a lot of these early doctors believed it. And the reason they fell for it, and they just tricked themselves. They had a new kind of inoculation that started in the late 1700s. It was called Cetonian vaccination. The original one is you cut yourself pretty deep. You took the pus from somebody who had smallpox, and you had to take it out of the nodules or the pustules at a certain time to make sure it had this kind of pus in it, right? And you would take that and you put it into the person's arm, and they were supposed to get sick. They were supposed to get smallpox, but you were supposed to treat them and heal them so they would be immune, right? Instead, Sutton decided, well, I'm just going to take that fluid out earlier, which was just clear fluid. Apparently, didn't have much of anything in it, and so in a little bit shallower cuts, and then you put it in. So people who got this particular inoculation didn't really get sick. They might have a couple bumps, maybe a little fever or something, but they didn't really get sick. And it was very, very popular because, well, you didn't get sick. And inoculators at the time said, "Oh, this is not real inoculation. This is horrible. This is quackery." But it caught on, and that's the way inoculation continued. So by the time we got to Jenner's time, the way they wanted to test to see if vaccination worked, they would do the same inoculation to see if they could make you get smallpox, which it wouldn't make you get smallpox anyway, because it was this kind of different way of doing things. So you weren't like really testing it against smallpox. And so, Dr. Crichton noticed this in the 1890s, like, how did they let this go through? It's not logical, right? But it did. And that started the whole craze, because now they had a new thing. And you have to keep in mind, during this time in the 1600s into the 1700s, they were using like blood of white puppy dogs. They were using all sorts of different things, dried human flesh, old man's urine, wolf guts, all these things like, witchcraft. These are things that the medical men were using. They were also using things like bleeding and the hot regimen, where they would put you in a room and cover you with blankets, no fresh air, no fresh water. And they would give you toxic metal type based medications like calomel, which is mercury, arsenic, strychnine. So you're stuck in a hot room. The idea is you're going to sweat it out, right? But that didn't really work out too well. A lot of people just died from that treatment. And what's interesting, to go back into the late 1600s, 1680s, Thomas Sydenham, which is known as the English Hippocrates, the father of English medicine, noticed that, well, this hot regimen is not really a good idea, because he saw the poor people who didn't get that, they seemed to get through smallpox. So he started not doing that. And he got tremendous success. And he ended up talking with a Dr. Cole. And Dr. Cole's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm doing the same thing now. And smallpox is easily cured as long as we don't do these dumb things." Right. So as long as they were still doing the bleeding part, but they got rid of the hot regimen. They were doing cold regimen, and they weren't doing these various toxic medications. And people got through smallpox fairly easily. And Sydenham was like, "Well, it's one of the slight diseases, and we don't have to worry about it anymore." So it's kind of interesting, because we often think of smallpox because you always see the pictures and they're all filled with pustules. But part of the reason people were dying from these diseases was because of their living conditions. And then these ridiculous, well, they didn't think they were ridiculous at the time, but these ridiculous medical practices like bleeding, the hot regimen, and these toxic medications. So when you stop doing those things, there wasn't really a problem.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned in your book that the first bunch of your book is dedicated to the living conditions of the 19th and 18th century.
Sure.
And you've got a good passage here. Instead, imagine a world where workplaces had no health, safety, or minimum wage laws. The 1800s was a century when people put in 12 to 16 hours a day at the most tedious menial labour. Imagine bands of children roaming the streets out of control because the parents were labouring days. Children were also involved in dangerous and demoralising work. Picture the city of New York surrounded not by suburbs, by rings, but by rings of smouldering garbage, dumps and shanty towns, cities where hogs, horses and dogs and their refuse were commonplace in the streets. Many infectious diseases were rampant throughout the world, particularly in the larger cities. This is not a description of the Third World, but a large portion of what the United States and other civilized Western countries used to be only a century or so ago. I think a lot of people have forgotten that, like how bad conditions were during that period.
Yeah, when I first started this and I did my first charts, and we saw that, or I saw that the levels of death had declined by nearly 100% for every infectious disease, I was like, well, why is that? And then when I started reading the history, actually looking at old history books, not just and I never used more recent books from the mid to later 1900s. So I'm reading this stuff, and it's like, wow, the conditions there were awful. So you had really no sanitation. So you went to the bathroom, it went out the window, went into your water supply. All the industries were in the cities, so the tanners and all these different industries dumped their waste into the water supply. So your water supplies, excuse me, was polluted. So it was a big industrial toilet. So you have that. The living conditions were crowded and jammed with huge numbers of people, the poor, the miserable poor. In London in the mid 1800s, there were hundreds of thousands of people in East London. There were on there what we used to call the ragged edge of misery. They were just barely surviving. The food supply was awful because there's no refrigeration. And so you would get what you get, right? And a lot of it was rotten food, diseased food, poor nutrition food. And then you had coal. Coal was being burned for heating. So you had all the smoke and smog going up into the air and settling back down. The London fog wasn't fog like, nice fluffy clouds. It was filled with all these particulates. So now you're breathing in all that stuff. So not only are you in a giant toilet with horrible rotting food, you're also in a chimney living like that. And then you also worked 12, 16, 18 hours a day, which could be seasonal. So women often turned to prostitution. Children had to work as young as 4 years old in mines and factories. So you're overworked. And when something goes wrong, you have nobody to rely on. So children ended up being, on the streets by themselves. And so you put all these things together, and people would be dropping like flies, and they were. And so you had and then you had these, but you had all these, bizarre medical notions. So if you did get sick, you would get these things that would often result in a poor outcome. so you had that on top of it, and vaccination was driving tuberculosis. So you put all these together, it's not a good situation. And they didn't really recognize this really till the mid 1800s, and really started taking action around 1875. And that's when we started having a big transformation. Yeah, life back then was not what I used to think. I always pictured, because you watch I love movies. So you watch the older movies, like the black and white movies, and even the color ones, and everybody's in nice suits and parasols and nice carriages going through the cities, and it's like, oh wow, that was a lovely time, Yeah, but the horses were also pooping in the streets. Those were the elites. Those were the wealthy people. Most people did not even remotely live like that. They lived from day to day trying to just survive.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've got another you got a report there I managed to pick up on archive.org. It was like a living conditions in London, and like people were living with, like, if a sibling died in the family, sometimes a dead body would just be rotting in the house, and they'd be living like 13 people to like a 2-bed house kind of thing. Yeah, shocking.
Sure. And remember, there's no toilets to start with. They had outhouses, privies out in the streets where people would share those, and of course that just went splash, splash, splash down in the ground. And then a lot of times the sewage was actually in the bottom of these houses. And these types of dwellings where the poor lived, it would be like jammed up at the top, like jammed with people, and then the middle part would just there would be drawings of people all despondent, just jam people in there. And then there was places in the basement with the sewage and the rats and all sorts of insects, cockroaches. People lived there. That was their basement dwelling. Well, I wouldn't even call it, it's worse than a dungeon. Yeah. So if you live like that, just from physically, you're going to suffer. And then morally, just the psychological impacts of living like this from day to day. It's no wonder people died in their teens and early 20s. Not just by being destroyed from all these, this environment.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I think it's plumbing that brought us out of that, not vaccines. On your smallpox thing, I've got a quote here from Béchamp or Pasteur, if you've read that book. It's quite an excellent one. It's written in, I think, 1932, and it's examining the fight between Pasteur and Béchamp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they're talking about the compulsory vaccination of smallpox, and they say the Vaccination Inquirer of London, England, says that in Brazil, where they have rigid compulsory vaccination laws and most energetic compulsion, the death rate from smallpox per 100,000 in Rio de Janeiro for 1913-1922, a 10-year period, was over 600 times as high as that of London, where opposition is strong and the exemption laws are widely used. If these are only accidents, as the doctors undoubtedly will claim, they at least prove that vaccines are useless. But my contention is that the use of animal pus injections is the cause of the higher figures. So yeah, very similar to your conclusions.
Right. And as they started implementing these societal changes, which took decades, right? So labor laws, cleaning up these miserable living conditions, electricity, greatest invention ever, which we kind of take for granted as we are right now, right? We're using electricity. That came in, so that's replacing, you got lighting, you got better, less use of coal. You have refrigeration, first the icebox and refrigeration, so you got better quality food. And then these other inventions coming in at the same time, right? Like the car, replacing the horses, so you don't have, meters of horse shit in the streets. So all these things are coming in. And really, there's an act in England in 1875, the Public Health Act. And after that point, every infectious disease, measles, whooping cough, scarlet fever, tuberculosis, started to decline. And then there was the big pushback against vaccination because in 1871, 1873, there was a big outbreak of smallpox. And despite vaccination being, near 100%, it was rampant. So it didn't work. And people noticed that, and they noticed that, their family members were injured or killed. So in 1885, Leicester fought against it and they won, the town of Leicester, England. And they said, no, we're not doing this anymore. And their vaccination rates plummeted. And, the medical establishment said, well, you're all going to die. Well, too bad for you. You're stupid, but you're going to learn the lesson. Well, that never happened. And then, so their vaccination rates stayed low. Smallpox deaths declined, but so did every other infectious disease because you have all these things happening at the same time. And then vaccination rates started to decline in all of England because they had a conscientious clause that was put in place. And so you have vaccination rates going down, smallpox deaths going down, enteric fever, everything is going down at the same time. And so you would think, vaccination rates are going down, so we're all going to get smallpox. Well, that never happened because it had nothing to do with it. And as vaccination rates declined, that fed back into less tuberculosis, less smallpox. Yeah, the whole thing was just a sham from the beginning. So as everything starts declining in lethality, by the 1950s and 1960s, infectious disease was not a problem. It just wasn't a problem. There was enough people that wrote about it that said, well, wow, okay, the public health movement has fixed the problem. We can expect that all these infectious disease deaths will one day be a thing of the past. We don't have to worry about them. But now here we are. So
yeah, it's when you start studying the history of it, you can see why they've used it as a mechanism for control, really, can't you?
So it was fading away. And there was enough people that were aware of it. There were doctors. It was a public health movement and natural doctors that were, advocating for the things that actually worked, which was sunshine, fresh water, these types of things, sanitation, sanitary way of living, they called it, right? And that continued into the early 1900s. And there was people that advocated all that. And, but there was people that wanted to go the other way. So they eventually replaced Dr. Crichton's article in the Encyclopedia Britannica in the 1920s, and they got rid of vaccination and they changed it to vaccine therapies. And the vaccine therapies was barely mentioned vaccination. Certainly got rid of all of Crichton's criticisms and said, oh, we're going to have a whole new bunch of different therapies that we're going to be able to use, and we're going to all be happier with all these different new therapies coming up. And they came up with different therapies, vaccines for acne, vaccines for like lots of stuff that eventually just went away.
So very similar to what they're doing with mRNA vaccines now. Well, quote unquote vaccines.
Just more dumb. So, and they came up with a scarlet fever vaccine, but that was particularly deadly, so that never caught on. But the bigger killers, scarlet fever and tuberculosis, they were the big killers. And pneumonia, they went to basically zero without any of these vaccines. They didn't have a vaccine. We don't have a vaccine on the schedule for that. And the smaller ones, whooping cough and measles, they developed vaccines for that, and we're kind of stuck with those, even though they weren't the big killers. And their death rate had declined by 98 to 100% before there were vaccines, which
Yeah.
all the charts clearly show. So
Your charts are incredible. The first time I saw those, it really blew me away.
yeah, me too. I mean, I had no idea. And I have to credit Neil Miller. He had a little. So I was listening to this program called Gary Null out of New York City, and I was listening to for health related reasons. And I had a kind of a health awakening, realizing my American diet was horrible. Anyway, so I'm listening to this guy, and he would have people on about different topics, a lot of different topics. A really smart guy. And sometimes you had people about vaccination, and they would talk about neurological damage for vaccines. Like, oh, that sounds bad. I had kids on the way or just there, and I thought, gee, I'm a little nervous about this vaccine thing now. And so I picked up a couple books. I don't remember what the other books were, but one of them was just this little green booklet by Neil Miller. And I flipped through it, and there was a chart saying death rates for measles had declined by 95% before there was a vaccine. And I thought the guy was crazy.
Wow.
Because I didn't think it was true. I was like, that can't be true. That's crazy. And I just basically threw it on my coffee table and ignored the guy. But then something kept on nagging me. So I went to a local library, and I found on the third almanac deaths from measles every 10 years. And I took out a piece of graph paper and charted it. And I was like, huh, that's basically right. And I just sat there for a long time. I couldn't believe it. And I don't even know why I couldn't believe it. I don't know where this idea was implanted in my head, but I just couldn't believe it. And then I thought to myself, well, maybe the almanac's wrong. I was like, I still couldn't believe it. So I decided to go to a local medical library. I'd never been there before, Yale Medical. And I came in, can I use I'm here to use your library. And the guy gave me, I said, okay, sign here. I was like, oh, that was easy. And I went in there and I found these big, tall olive green books called U.S. Vital Statistics. So I said, well, it's probably in here because I'm an engineer by training. So, well, that's probably where the data is. I'm going to go get it. And I photocopied it. I think I had to go back once or twice to get all the dates because they were distributed across all these books. And I went back, put them on my spreadsheet and hit chart, boom. And there's down by 98% before they came out with the vaccine in 1963. I'm like, wow. I was like, I never heard of this.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? You want to bring up a couple of the graphs? Just so
we can do that. That'll be fun. Where'd it go? There we go. How are we looking?
Yeah, good.
So we'll just skip ahead. So here's, let's just go. I think we'll just go ahead here somewhere. Sorry, I'm jumping around. All right, so this is the chart that I first created. Actually, it starts in 1900, so that's the chart. Anyway, so there's the vaccine introduced in 1963. We can see the death rate is quite high, and then it just goes down. And that's when they came out with the vaccine in 1963, which was a killed measles virus vaccine, which was quite problematic. And so they had to reformulate and reintroduce a new vaccine in 1967. But we'll just go from the beginning here. So this makes the social media rounds showing how vaccines work. And there's problems with this social media post, right? The chart provides no context. It begins in 1939, so it doesn't show you the full data set. It's on a logarithmic chart, so it makes it look like, gee, look at this big plummet down here. Okay. It's only looking at US
social media post pushing vaccines, I take it.
I'm sorry, what?
I take it's a social media post pro-vaccine, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, there's all these problems with it. And one of the first things is measles was not a big threat in 1962. So we have all these other things like syphilis, how many deaths from tuberculosis, and all these other things. Measles was 0.022% of deaths. So you still had a problem, but it wasn't like the big death plague that you might think based on media reports now, right? So it was quite low. Again, 1963, their chart starts in 1939 when most of the problem was already tackled. If you started in 1900, that chart wouldn't be very impressive.
Interesting.
They also show it in a logarithmic chart, which magnifies the tail end of things, right? So now it looks like, wow, look at that big plummet in 1963, right? But that is really this chart when most of the problem was already taken care of. There's really not much of a change because now you're in the small area. And then if you look at data from England that has data starting in 1838, because the US national data starts in 1900, and you see deaths from measles was quite high. as you might imagine, with the conditions that we talked about. And then around 1885, it starts to decline. They introduced the vaccine in 1968 in England. And by that time, it's down 99.9 something percent, 100% down.
Yeah, incredible.
So they don't, when they're trying to show you data, they're not showing you the full picture. They show you this distorted view. And then if you look at the data kind of magnified in, you're zooming in near the tail end. So this is for the US. You can see the red line is the trend line. There's really not much of an impact on the vaccine if you just follow the trend line. You can say, well, yeah, after 67, there's kind of like an impact. And then if you look at England, same thing. So we're at the very end of measles being a problem. The trend line shows like no real impact by the vaccine. I mean, data is the data, right? And when I first started looking at this, I couldn't accept it either. I was like, I understand why people go, well, that can't be true because that's what I did. It's like, it's like just hit you like this can't be true. And then there's items from medical journals. Here's from 1959, just, before a few years before the vaccine. And this is from the British Medical Journal. They're talking about over 10 years. There's very few complications from measles. Measles is just a mild ailment. We didn't do anything special. No problem, right? And this is from 1981. Whooping cough and measles are no longer important causes of death. And he's arguing against universal vaccination because why? Why are we doing this?
Yeah, I've got a quote from Virus Mania here. It goes, for example, in 2008, the journal European Surveillance reported that in the Czech Republic, although a program for vaccination against measles, mumps, and rubella (MMR) had been started in 1987, thousands of people contracted mumps in 2002, and even more so in 2005. The highest number of cases was in the group of 15 to 19-year-olds, almost 90% of whom had been vaccinated twice.
Yeah, you find this all the time. It happens all the time when they actually look at stuff. They're like, oh, it's not magical after all. And this is Langmuir. He was like the father of basically epidemiological medicine, right? Oh, it says right there. And it eventually became the CDC. And he knew it was a self-limiting infection of short duration, moderate severity, and low fatality. This is actually his quote. And he was like, why are you trying to eliminate measles? Because we can do it. That's all. Was it necessary? No, he just decided it was something he wanted to do. And then we run into problems. So the 6 day and their promises. So 63, they go, well, it's only one shot and it gives you protection for life. Well, that turns out not to be true. And then they expected by 1967 they would eradicate the disease from the United States. Well, that didn't turn out to be true either. So now we have 2 shots for kids instead of 1 shot, and they had to reformulate it in 1967 because the killed measles virus vaccine caused a lot of problems, including atypical measles. And they didn't really have a stable vaccine until 1980. And vaccination rates have been slowly creeping up, but by the time you had to 1980, there was no real problem with measles, as you might expect. You didn't have problems with any of these things. And so you had problems with it, like problems with the brain disturbance and all that kind of stuff, pneumonia, and that type of thing from this killed measles virus in 1963, killed measles vaccine. Oh yeah, and all right, so the atypical measles, which was a worse case of measles, which could last 16 years after, and no matter what you did, the people were stuck with this kind of atypical measles. They would keep on getting it. And I believe, I think it was over 1 million people that suffered with atypical measles. I could be wrong about that. I don't have that reference in front of me, but it was a problem big enough that they switched out. But what's interesting is they don't ever tell you that something went wrong. They simply just start something else, right? So when they decide they're going to do more measles vaccines for like women or elderly, they don't go, oh, we were wrong about lifelong immunity. They just simply give you another shot. And they do that with whooping cough too. They screwed up people's immune system with DTaP, but they don't tell you that. They write it in their medical journals, but they don't tell you that. They go, well, now we added more to the schedule. That's all they do. They never say we made a mistake. We have to do something else.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's run by a criminal cartel. They
just have no interest in telling anybody because they can get away with it. They can just basically, well, we just added more to the schedule. And now, your grandma has to get it too. And they don't never have to go back and say that they made a mistake. Now we can look at all the diseases in this chart. It's measles, typhoid, diphtheria, scarlet fever, whooping cough. Sometimes we get a little pushback. Oh, it was antibiotics. That's what did it. We did antibiotics. That's probably, and then the vaccines came in. Well, penicillin wasn't mass produced in 1944, streptomycin in 1947. And then you see the whooping cough vaccine way at the end and measles way at the end when there was no problem and there was no scarlet fever vaccine. So everything was declining and then eventually hit zero.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Just looking at that in wonder, it's first time I saw that, it's just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I still don't believe it when I look at it. I spent oodles of time double checking the data, and there are actually charts in the CDC old documents from the 60s that show the same thing. So somebody drew them by hand, not like with a computer. So
yeah.
Now again, we go back to England, 1838. They have a longer time frame. Scarlet fever, the big killer. You can see the big red line jumping up and down. Then around 1875, everything starts declining until you get to penicillin mass production. Okay, but basically things are near zero. And then the DTB vaccine and the measles vaccine, 57 and 68. There's no real problem, right?
Yeah, you can definitely see it.
Yeah, and all the references, I try to put that in a lot of the charts. You see all the references, how I built these charts. So anybody can go and do the same thing, although it's kind of tedious, but you can do it.
Excellent.
Now, if we take those 5 deaths, combine them into one death line, basically, mortality line, you can see things around 1875 start to stabilize and then starts a nice downward trend. And so that by the time you come out with penicillin in 1944, you're already down 97%, over 97% in mortality rate from these 5 infectious diseases. And you can see way at the end, here's the DTB vaccine that saved us and measles vaccine that saved us, apparently, right? But not really.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
And then the big killer, tuberculosis, which if you look it up now, it's like this big disease that's highly infectious, but we don't, at least in the United States, that's not part of the schedule is the BCG vaccine. But the streptomycin, which is used for tuberculosis, 1947, and the BCG vaccine in 1954 were introduced way at the tail end when most of the work had been done. And when you look at the trend lines, which I'm not sure if we got now, if I look at the trend lines, it doesn't really have much of an impact, if any. And you'll notice tuberculosis, the big killer that nobody ever talks about, was far bigger than the little green lines at the bottom, which was measles, right? And diphtheria and typhoid, they were bigger killers, but we don't vaccinate against typhoid or tuberculosis or diphtheria. Well, diphtheria is in the DTP vaccine. But you see, most of the work of that was done by the 1936 as well. So all these diseases plummeted to zero. The only one that didn't was tuberculosis, but it was trending towards zero. And we don't talk about those diseases that aren't on the vaccine schedule because they're not vaccine preventable. So we forget about them like they didn't exist. In this case, this is from Massachusetts. So they had statistics at the state level. And here's all the data from whatever page. And there's a link at the top where you can actually go find this and go to page 63. Take all this data, put it in your spreadsheet, and you should get the exact same chart.
Excellent.
So, the data is available everywhere. This is all public data. It's just a matter of finding it, which is easier now than I used to have to go to dusty libraries and go photocopy stuff.
What was your initial motivation for writing the book?
Curiosity. Well, so first I had young kids, and so that got me to look at these books. And then when I found Neil Miller's chart, then it just got me curious. And then I went to the library, and I was like, oh, I still thought it wasn't true. Then I went to the other library, and I had to gather the data. I just needed to. And then once I had the charts, then I was like, well, why did that happen? What was the real reason? It just got me very curious. It wasn't because I had a vaccine injured child or anything like that. It just was curious, really. And I became obsessive, really, honestly. And
interesting. What got me kind of involved? I got a diplomatic post. We mostly focus on geopolitics and energy, that kind of thing. But, occasionally we've been branching a bit out into like climate stuff because a lot of that data is a bit dodgy as well. But what got me interested in it is I went to take my baby to get vaccinated and stuff. Watch they get vaccinated was like, that's horrible to watch. So I did a little Google and I managed to come across like a 2004 study where they where they were saying mercury was safe in vaccines and all this lot, and then a scientist vaccinated a bunch of chimps and then killed the chimps and then opened up their brains and found the mercury was all in their brains. So from there, I've been like, I don't trust any of this, and especially after the COVID event, I don't trust.
COVID really triggered a bunch of people. It didn't trigger me because I thought, well, these people are just, it'll blow over in a week or two. And I was like, oh, whatever, I don't care, it doesn't bother me, and it never did. And I was like, oh, okay, people are being insane again. This is like smallpox all over again in England. It's like, whoa, people are going batshit crazy. I was like, oh, good grief. I just kind of rolled my eyes most of the time. I was like, oh, this is insane. Stop doing this. And that got me re-energized to write the 10th anniversary edition.
Excellent.
Because I realized we hadn't put everything we wanted in the book, and I had some more things to put in there. And so we relaunched it in 2023, right? Yep. If I can do math, which I probably should be able to do math. Yeah, it was very, very interesting when that all started. I heard about it on the news, and I was like, oh, okay, well, this will definitely blow over. And it kept on going and going, and then there's the panic, and then the masking, and the lockdowns. Wow, I was stunned. I was stunned it could be that bad.
Yeah, they went pretty far with it, didn't they?
Yeah.
Do you have any theories on the motivation behind of why they managed to do that, and how they managed to lock everyone down? Like previous pandemic exercises, like Event 201.
Yeah, well, they've coordinated activities across multiple countries, so they can now pull the trigger and get everybody on board pretty easily. I don't know the details of how they all do that, honestly, but it did wake up. I think they overshot. They went too far, so it awoke a lot of doctors and a lot of the public. And for me, it wasn't, I didn't care. I mean, I just ignored the whole thing as much as I could. They threw a bunch of people out of homeless shelters. So I was on the street, like I wasn't afraid or anything, like I was going to get COVID and die. So I was, helping them out, get some food, because they just wanted food and shelter. They didn't give a shit about this either. And so, I went out there and I would, try to, hold their hand, comfort them a little bit. Because, one lady had to, basically live on the street. She only had one leg, and she got thrown out of the homeless shelter. She had to live in a porta potty some nights. It's just, it's like, what are you people doing? And just horrible. And none of them cared about this, and I didn't get the infection and die. I never tested. I never did any of that stuff. It just didn't bother me at all. I never got sick. No more than usual. I don't remember getting really sick at all. And none of them got sick and died. And they were poorly nourished. They ate junky food like McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts. That was because they didn't care about nutrition either. They just wanted food. That's not their primary concern. Just food and shelter. Any food will do. So they were fine. They weren't dropping dead in the streets, as you might imagine. Like they were trying to get everybody to think was happening. So I didn't have any problems with it at all. And I was out in the street all the time, except when I was threatened with bodily harm. I was like, how come you're not wearing a mask? I'm going to kill you, basically. Oh, well, that's nice. Thanks.
Yeah, people really did go crazy for it.
Oh, yeah. I was talking to my mom on the phone, walking outside by the shore, and this older guy comes up and he runs up to me. He's got a mask on. He starts screaming at me. I said, Mom, I'll call you back. He's screaming. He's like, you're crazy. You're crazy. I'm like, sir, calm down. You're going to have a heart attack. He was like 20, 30 feet away from me. He runs up to me. He's like, now this far away. He's like, you're not wearing a mask. You're crazy. I'm like, sir, relax. And so what's the problem? And he just kept on rambling. I said, and then he goes, aren't you afraid to die? I'm like, no. And then he was kind of stunned and he just wandered off. I felt bad for the guy. He was stressed out of his mind.
Yeah.
It was this kind of irrational idea that, everybody had to wear masks even outside in the fresh air. It's like, the whole thing was crazy. And then I went up to pick up some food at some Thai restaurant, and I was standing by myself on the far end of the restaurant, and this guy starts screaming at me. He's like, I'm gonna break your effing neck. I'm gonna break your. I'm like looking at this like I'm in some kind of bizarre reality, and he ran out and he ran to his car. I thought he was going to get a tire iron and kill me. And I'm just watching this guy. He's running around in the parking lot, back to his car, back. He's debating whether he needs to kill me or not, I guess. And he finally drove off. I'm like, just so surreal. I just don't believe it. It's like, so crazy people running around. But I think they overshot. I've talked to quite a few doctors since then. They're like, they start looking at all of it now. So it's not just the COVID. They're looking at everything.
I think a lot of people are, yeah.
Yeah, and when they look at everything, they're like, oh, wait a second, something's not right. The more people that look at it, the more people go, something's wrong with this whole system. So,
yeah, definitely.
Which we had discovered, 10 years earlier.
Yeah, Suzanne mentioned in a Joe Rogan one about the polio vaccine having SV40 again, and then the SV40 coming back in the Pfizer vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
That must be.
I haven't really looked at any of what's in the vaccines, but I do have a person that I trust 100% because I saw some pictures on the internet of these little structures and types of things, and they sent me the actual pictures that they did with dark field microscopy, if I said that correctly. Mm-hmm. And it definitely showed these kind of structures that were self-forming. What those are, that would be speculation, but there was definitely very, very bizarre things going on under the dark field microscope. And again, this is not like just I grabbed an image off the internet, right? This person I know, and I know they're legitimate and they're honest, and they did this work themselves. I'm like, what the heck are they doing in these things? But if you know the history of all this infectious disease, none of this is necessary anyway. So it's all just more, I call it stupid human tricks, bleeding people, giving them mercury, putting them in hot rooms, scratching pus on their arms. These were stupid human tricks, right? Humans can be smart, but they can also be enormously stupid. So these were all stupid. This whole thing is stupid. None of this should have happened, but it did, amazingly, again. So hopefully with, I have a Substack. You read some of the Substack articles, or you read the books, or we just put out an audio book, or we have a companion book that has hundreds of doctors' quotes over the decades that were very critical of vaccination. The only vaccine back then was smallpox. So a lot of critical words and a timeline of all sorts of interesting events and all that kind of thing, and some rare documents. And, we put that out. And so if you want to read those things, great. And the more you're educated, the more you're like, seriously, are we still doing this? It should have gone away. I think if it wasn't regenerated in the 1920s by he who shall not be named, if they hadn't regenerated it, this would have been of a historic curiosity vaccination. It would have been just history. As a matter of fact, I think I forget which doctor said that in the late 1800s. It might have been Crichton. It'll just disappear and it'll be just of historical interest, because we know now that this is dumb, like bleeding and other things that we're doing. So it'll just go away eventually. Well, I forget which. I think it was Crichton. Anyway, he was wrong about that. We're still stuck with this dumb idea.
Yeah, in Virus Mania, I'm not sure if you read that one. It's quite a good book. Yeah, there's a quote in there: "Pandemics are as profitable as wars these days." So I think they're going to be around for a long time.
Well, yeah, yes and no. It's only a matter if people decide they're going to follow it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
If you can get the majority to do it. But if once you have a tipping point and not enough people go, no, I don't care, and they stop listening to media and they stop listening to government officials entirely, then people just go about their day. And they can only impose so much. So once you have some tipping point, they'll just ignore it. I think that happened with the monkeypox. They tried to get that going, but I haven't heard anything about it, but I don't really pay attention much. But there's certainly not a big monkeypox plague. I haven't heard about that. So I think a lot of people just ignored it and it just went away. So the only way anything goes away is from the public, from the bottom up. It'll never go away from the top down because it's too corrupted.
Definitely.
So the more people know, the less they have to succumb to this kind of stuff. And that goes for, my opinion, lots of things in medicine. And most of the things that we do, we don't need to do. We just need to have eat healthy, eat whole foods, don't eat McDonald's, don't eat Dunkin' Donuts, don't drink Coca-Cola. Get plenty of exercise, sunshine, fresh air, the hygienic mode of living, and and have a positive outlook. Don't succumb to fear. Fear is a real destroyer that we don't appreciate. There was a guy Dr. Henry Littlejohn in the 1880s. And he was a sanitary inspector for hospitals. And he had a team of sanitary inspectors, and they would go to these hospitals. And in these hospitals, they had scarlet fever and smallpox and measles and yada, 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 all different fevers. And he and his team never got sick, and his family never got sick either. So he never transmitted to his family members. And his conclusion was that it was, if you're afraid as a sanitary inspector, you will get sick. If you're not afraid, no problem. So you can take that for what you want, but he did that for 25 years. So he probably has some experience in that area.
Yeah, 100% agree on that. I think if you get into a doom loop, it can be really, really
yeah.
bad
Once you get afraid, you just basically destroy yourself, and then who knows what's going to happen. You're certainly not going to. It's not going to end well. Fear is great for there's a bear. Oh shit, I should run. But besides that, if you have constant, continuous fear, it's going to just completely destroy you, and something's going to go wrong. So it's just probably the reason I never got sick when I was out in the streets with all the homeless people. I wasn't worried one little bit.
Good way to be, definitely.
Yeah. The only time I was a little worried is when the guy went for his car that he was going to kill me. That made me, I wasn't really afraid either. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I guess if he came at me, really, then it would have been different. But I was like, I wonder if he's going to come back with a tire iron.
Oh, dear.
And I thought I was just very curious. Somebody sent me the link to this particular CDC. It's on the CDC. This is vital statistics. And in this, on page 85, you have a number of different charts. And this is the measles chart somebody hand drew, which matches exactly what I have. So if you doubt the data, you can go to this CDC document, if it's still there, which I think last time I checked it was. And you'll see all these diseases. I just picked out measles, but all these diseases look just like I showed you in those other charts. So this is verification that the data, I didn't just make it up, right? So you can either go look up the data, or you can go to the CDC website here and go get this particular document and look at page 85. You'll see a whole bunch of different diseases, and this is measles, which matches exactly what I have. And this is a quote from a particular book in 2012, and they're talking about during the period from 1901 to 45, before there was really a vaccine, 97% decline in mortality rate. And they show a similar chart, and you can see death rates, plummeting from 1901 down to 1945, and then the vaccine came out actually in 1957, right, at a national level. So most of the problem was gone. So I'm not the only one that ever did this. A quote whether, vaccination was justified. Whooping cough had become mild. It wasn't really a big deal by the 1960s. It was in the 1800s and early 1900s, but then by 1960, not a big deal. And then Gordon Stewart, I don't think I say that here, also wrote an article in the Lancet. Again, no evidence vaccination played a major role in decline in incidence and mortality of whooping cough. And this is an important article in 1995 because people still have this vision that if you get whooping cough, you're just going to start coughing and you'll cough to death, right? But here he's saying this is 500 consecutive cases of natural whooping cough. Most cases of whooping cough are relatively mild. Doctors are unlikely to hear the characteristic cough, which may be the only symptom. Parents can be reassured that serious outcomes are unlikely, right? Which you would never hear it generally from a public official, or you hear it in your doctor's office. Oh yeah, whooping cough, that's a mild disease. But that was the fact. So
fascinating. In medical journals, they seem to talk to themselves. I mean, I've read medical journals that talk about overpopulation and how they should promote certain things to save the environment and that kind of thing. And that's in the British Medical Journal. Yeah,
they talk to they don't expect the public to read these things. I think they just write things. Basically, they're writing things to each other. Nutrition Reviews 2000 shows the decline in measles mortality down by 99%. So again, you can find verification of everything I'm saying. 90% of infectious disease declined before there were any antibiotics before 1940. Same thing as the charts show, right? And this I'm not going to read all this, but basically in 1951, this McCormick is like, all these diseases went down despite no medical intervention. Some had, some didn't, but they all came down at the same time. So he figured out that there's some kind of unrecognized factor, not all these medical interventions. It wasn't medical interventions, it's all these unrecognized factors, which is what we just talked about, which he wasn't aware of. The change in life, change in the lifestyle, improved sanitation, and all these things we talked about, that's what did it. And, a lot of times people will say it's electricity and plumbers, right? But that is actually true. That's the majority. And McKinley, they did a little study. At most, 3.5% of total decline mortality since 1900 could be attributed to medical measures. So it wasn't as I originally thought when I was younger, years ago, that it was, modern medicine saved us, right? Modern medicine saved us from all these things, which isn't true. It's a mythology. And a lot of people still believe that. So you get stuck in, well, what about modern medicine that saved us? Oh, no, that's not really. And in there, they had a chart, and you can see the mortality rate decreasing. But you also see the GDP, percent of GDP, gross national product, going up. So in 1930, it was 5% of GDP, and then it was trending towards 8.5. Now it's almost 20%. So it's going up and up and up. We spend more and more and more on all this healthcare stuff when we're getting really nothing out of it compared to everything that was done by, modern living.
A lot of people are getting very rich off that.
Oh yeah. And what's interesting, so in the late 70s, there was a scare, as it should have been, for neurological damage from the DTP vaccine. And so there was a huge drop in vaccination. So the dotted blue line is the drop in the vaccination rate. So it dropped, and you can see.
So that's 1977 that they dropped the vaccination.
Yeah. So the drop went down to 30%, and then they finally got it back up to 95% for whooping cough. But you'll notice there's no big spike up in death because the deaths were almost near zero anyway.
Incredible.
So it didn't matter if you were vaccinated. There was no big change in death rate. And then in Sweden, they found that 84% of children, despite having 3 doses of vaccine, they found Bordetella pertussis in their lungs. So they said, "Oh, you have whooping cough." So they decided to discontinue nationally the vaccination program, right? So no more national DTP vaccine. And they were also worried about its safety, which they should have been. And so we have this chart here. They started vaccinating in 1953, and then for 17 years, from 1979 to 1996, there's no vaccine. But you see, there's no spike up in deaths, which you would expect because it was near zero anyway.
Yeah, this chart was another one that really struck me.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy once if you're in your normie, and if you're a normie. Which I used to be a normie. And here's a magnified view. You can see over those 17 years, there's no big increase or even a small increase in deaths. It has no effect whatsoever. And this is an important quote. This is by Dr. Cherry, which it says there, 112-year odyssey of pertussis and pertussis vaccination, mistakes made and implications for the future. And keep in mind, when they make mistakes, they're making it on the entire public. And they will never tell you that they made a mistake. Like we talked about earlier, they'll just change the schedule and add new things to the schedule, but they don't tell you why. They just do it. And then you're supposed to just go, "Yes, sir." So this is from there's a link to that article. So I would encourage people to get it and read it. And so in that article, there's another article where a Dr. Witt said the vaccine, the DTaP, is only effective for 3 years, right? So Dr. Cherry acknowledges that, and he goes, because of linked epitome suppression, which is a fancy way of saying original antigenic sin, which is a way to say that because we gave you this vaccine, we misprogrammed your immune system. Your immune system does not work the same as if it had encountered Bordetella pertussis naturally. So your immune system has been changed. And he says all children who are primed with DTaP vaccines will be more susceptible to pertussis, that's whooping cough, throughout their lifetimes. And there's no easy way to decrease this increased lifetime susceptibility. So once they misprogrammed your immune system, you are programmed that way for life. You can't fix it.
Good grief.
So because of linked epitome suppression, all children who are primed with DTaP vaccines would be more susceptible to pertussis throughout their lifetimes, and there is no easy way to decrease this increased lifetime susceptibility. And instead of going, "Wow, we were totally messed up, we should be embarrassed," he goes, "We should consider routinely administering Tdap vaccine, which is like DTaP, every 3 years to all adolescents and children and adults who are primed with DTaP." So what he's saying is every 3 years, you should get this vaccine for the rest of your life.
He's a good salesman for the pharmaceutical companies, I'll tell you that.
Well, this is not a good thing to put in your medical journal because people will read it and go, "Whoa," and they're hoping nobody reads it or they don't think anybody will read it. But if Don't take my word for this slide. Go to that PDF, read it yourself, read the whole thing. And it's just like the arrogance, the insane arrogance, not to go, wow, we totally messed up. This was a bad idea. Oh, we should fall on our sword. We should tell the public how badly. No, just give them more. Give them more. Even though the whooping cough wasn't a problem anymore, but we got to we just got to keep doing it. It's the magic V word. These guys are obsessed with this V word.
Yeah.
They hate the other V word, vitamins, but they love the vaccine V word. It's like their religion. So here we are. And the reason it misprograms things, because they didn't understand at the time when they were doing this in the 40s, that giving somebody an injection is different than breathing in bacteria into your lungs, because there's a semi-separate immune system. And I'm not an expert in this. Suzanne has explained this to me a few times, and I read it myself a bunch of times. But you have a semi-separate immune system that when you encounter something, it activates locally, and it creates all sorts of different chemicals. And so it's ready next time it encounters the bacteria so that you can expel it and be over with it, right? But when you do this, especially with a DTaP, it's not the full complement of antigens. It's a very small subset. So you get some kind of weak response, but now you're programmed that way. You can't fix it. So instead of just a healthier response and you cough it out, or don't cough at all because it's subclinical, now you're stuck with this system where you can't ever get rid of it. So, well, what's the solution? We'll do more of the thing that caused the damage in the first place. Great idea. So please go. Don't believe a word I said that I typed. Go get the article, read it yourself.
Yeah, I'll dig through it after. Yeah, definitely.
Then we have the flu, down 90% before they start vaccinating. No one ever talks about that. They just go, "Oh, get the flu vaccine." Then if we magnify that in that area, we see the brown line is flu deaths, flu and pneumonia deaths, and the dotted line is a vaccination rate. So as the vaccination rate started climbing throughout the 80s, and now it's 70% in 65 year or older, we see that eventually the death rate goes down. But the two red circles, the level that people die at, which is 23 per 100,000, is the same as it was when there was no vaccine. It hasn't changed. It actually went up for a while, and now it's back down. At least that's the way it was in 2016.
Yeah, I've got a CBS report where they're talking about, I think it's about in 2006, or 2009, one of the two. And they're talking about the flu vaccine, about how it hasn't brought down any deaths whatsoever.
No, it hasn't done. No, not at all. Now, it's harder to get this data because they don't put it in one place. You have to kind of dig. And like all these charts, these should all be on the CDC website or National Health Service's website. But if they did, no one would get vaccinated. You're like, oh, okay, why am I doing it? And I think that's the reason they don't put them up. They should. This is called, this is how you actually inform the public. This is informed consent.
Absolutely.
And talking about people writing things in medical journals amongst themselves, you're not supposed to read this stuff, right? This is a cell host and microbe. Fauci is the third author. So I'm just going to read this whole thing because it's mind-blowing. As of 2022, after more than 60 years of experience with influenza vaccines, very little improvement in vaccine prevention of infection has been noted. Wow. As pointed out decades ago, and still true today, the rates of effectiveness of our best approved influenza vaccines would be inadequate for licensure for most other vaccine preventable diseases. It is not surprising that none of the predominantly mucosal respiratory viruses has ever been effectively controlled by vaccines. Oh, okay. So it's not worked. Vaccines against non-systemic mucosal respiratory viruses with high mortality rates have thus far eluded vaccine development efforts. Okay. I mean, maybe I'm misreading this, but it's basically saying, well, the vaccines don't work.
Huh.
They haven't ever worked.
Absolutely incredible.
Here it is. And 60 years of experience. And they knew decades earlier, but they're still doing it. And the way these guys think, like, oh, well, it doesn't work, but we're going to do it a different way. And eventually, in the next 60 years, we'll get it. And we're allowed to experiment on everybody we want because we can.
Yeah.
This is the attitude they have.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, now we'll use mRNA, and in 10 years from now, they'll have a new dumb idea. It's like, you're admitting for 60 years you failed. Well, if I tried to do something for 60 years and failed, I think maybe I would quit. Maybe I would think, well, maybe I got the whole thing wrong. Maybe I should think of a different way to do it, like making sure people have enough vitamin D and zinc. Maybe we should look at that. Oh, wait, we can't make money that way. Shit.
Have you done much research into the corruption in the medical industry, or is your primary focus just vaccines and their effectiveness, that kind of?
I've dabbled in things like mammograms and cholesterol medications and psychiatric medications. And every time I look at anything, it's like, why are we doing that? It doesn't seem like it's really great. None of these things seem like they're useful. I mean, there's parts of medicine that are great, like, emergency operations, that type of thing. But a lot of these other things I think are just would be best served to get people properly nourished, because we know people are deficient in vitamin D because they're not out in sunshine, and they got scared back in the 70s and 80s that we're all going to die from sunshine. We're all going to die from cancer. But that's important for vitamin D production, right? So huge numbers of people are deficient in vitamin D. I just wrote about that. And the other thing is, because of industrial agriculture, we're deficient in magnesium. So people are deficient in magnesium. Unless you're really eating lots and lots of organic food and nothing else, you're going to be deficient in magnesium. And those are two critical things. Just those two things are critical in a healthy body. So you might think you're doing okay, but if you're deficient in those, you're going to have all sorts of negative problems, from arrhythmias to all sorts of different things, right?
Yeah.
So
John Campbell talks about that a lot, vitamin D, saying how they should be given, like when a patient comes in through the door, they should be giving them vitamin D and vitamin C.
Well, most people are deficient. And there was a study in, I forget which journal, and they compared the vitamin D levels between people who got secondary infections and those that didn't in a particular hospital. And if you were at the high end, like 50 nanograms per milliliter versus 10 nanograms per milliliter, you're like 95% less likely, or is down by 95% for any kind of infection. So what's the solution? Vitamin D, not antibiotics, like after the effect. So if you were to look at vitamin D levels, you would find, a lot of times people are deficient and you want to correct that. Magnesium is trickier. You can't actually do it in your blood, apparently. So 99 point whatever percent is in your tissues, and so you can't test for that. But the solution is to take extra magnesium of the right type, and you look into that yourselves. And then eat just as much as you can organic, not refined foods. So there's a lot of doctors recognized by the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's all about health. That's the key. If everybody was healthy, none of this stuff would exist. And in my opinion, since the 60s and 70s, especially accelerating through the 80s, we've gotten sicker and sicker and sicker because we eat more crappy food, we drink crappy stuff, we have obesity epidemic that we're mostly ignoring. So we're not healthy people overall. And if we corrected that would take care of lots and lots of problems. But of course, there's no profit in you being a healthy person. As a matter of fact, you're a negative. So you don't want too many healthy people. If we had a really healthy population, or in the United States, where it used to be about 5% of GDP or 3.5% of GDP, it would go back to that. And you wouldn't be having hospitals everywhere. You wouldn't have medications for every stupid little thing. All that would go away.
Yeah, there's a whole infrastructure for it, isn't there?
Yep. So final thoughts on all that. Yeah, don't worry about any of this infectious disease stuff because most of it was taken care of.
Yeah. So how have you found censorship in trying to get this message across?
Yeah, personally, not too much, really. I'm on, on Telegram, but that's small. And I'm on Substack, and they don't really currently do anything on Substack. They really don't censor anything there. And X, they don't currently censor anything, but that doesn't mean that can't change. Somebody can decide, well, we've got to start clamping down on these anti-vaxxers or this type of information. We don't like it. It's not that it's misinformation. It's like, we don't like that information. So, personally, I haven't really encountered too much. I know other people have, but
interesting. Yeah. And the manufacturers of vaccines, I think in America they have the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which protects all manufacturers from vaccine injuries, isn't it? Yeah,
that was a really dumb idea to sign that, Ronald Reagan. But he did. I heard he was pressured into it or whatever, but it was signed. This is the whole system is insane. It's like, oh, I got injured by, you can't sue the manufacturer. You can sue them for anything else. Your tire blows out or anything. but not this. This is a special category because they were getting hammered and they wanted protection, right? So now, since then, the schedule has exploded because, well, we can do anything we want. No one's going to do anything about it. They can't sue us. So, and we got the kangaroo vaccine court, so that doesn't matter. But the whole system's, in my opinion, is completely wrong. It's, I'm a freedom maximalist. So you should be able to say, hey, I'd like to get this vaccine. Not that I want to opt out. I don't want to get that. No, it's backwards. It's like, I'd like to go to my doctor and get a vaccine. Okay. I'd like to go get some medication. Okay. I don't want to get a medication or a vaccine. Okay. That's the way it should be. That's what freedom is, right? And
but the profit motive of a mandated vaccine must be through the roof. Because if you didn't mandate it, there would be a huge section of the population that wouldn't bother, and then everyone would see that population wasn't dying en masse from whatever disease they're trying to peddle that day.
Right. Yeah, so none of this stuff is necessary. Now, if you're not a healthy person and you think, well, maybe this will help me, go ahead. I don't have a problem. That's what you want to do. That's what you want to do. But to mandate it or saying, oh, this is the schedule and you can't go to school, which they did with smallpox too, which never really worked either. But there's no reason to force people to do these things. I mean, this mythical reason that they even gave when Lester started not vaccinating, they would say, well, a child that's not vaccinated is like a bag of gunpowder that will explode and kill the whole. This is what they were saying, which never happened. This whole idea is just, I don't know, I call it batshit crazy. You just need to get rid of it. The only way that goes away is with education, at the bottom level. But so I think it's starting to go that way. Where it will end on, I don't know.
Yeah. Have you got any people that you advise, well, besides yourself, do you advise on people following or reading up on, any book recommendations, that kind of thing?
No, not really. There's plenty of books out there, and some of them are better than others. I really don't read many current books, and I started that when I started doing this research. I was like, okay, I don't really have a horse in the game. I just want to know what the truth is. I don't care if it's pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine. I didn't even think about that. It was just like, I want to get the information as accurate as I can. And I said, I'm not going to read any current books. I'm just going to read the stuff from 1900 and earlier. That way I can get a real sense of, what the history is. So I don't really read a lot of current books. I didn't even read the Fauci book. So I might someday, but I have a whole stack of books like this high of different topics. I can't even get to those.
I did read the Fauci book. It was quite good. It went through the HIV epidemic, and it was like the parallels between that and COVID are remarkable. So you can see that they've already had like a test run from like 40 odd years ago. Yeah,
and they were just using that toxic medication AZT, which they shouldn't have given to anybody. But it's like, oh, this is going to be great, and they just got away with it. They always get there's been 50 years of journal entries, journal papers talking about how medicines kills 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 people every year in the United States. And those are just all ignored. There's clearly a lot that medicine kills. And they call it medical error, right? And nothing ever happens. It's like, look what's going on here. Look at all the people dying from this. Oh, no, we don't care. But then if somebody gets a case of measles, whoa, panic, death, destruction, it's irrational. But here we are.
During the COVID event, did you follow any of the excess deaths and that kind of thing? Because I know in Britain we had a lot of deaths in care homes where people were basically put on death pathways, which was built off the Liverpool care pathway, which was abolished in 2013. It's basically where you give them midazolam and morphine, that kind of thing, and don't feed them or give them water, and then people die quite quickly, unsurprisingly. Yeah. But people are estimating between 30 and 100,000 people were killed that way in 2020 and 2021. And in America, I think they had the remdesivir and ventilator thing, where they did a similar thing, where if you got a positive PCR test for COVID, then it immediately put you on a ventilator, even though going on a ventilator is something like a 30% more fatality rate anyway.
No, I didn't follow that too much. No. I don't have any of my own statistics, but it follows a historical pattern, right? So humans think they're smart, and generally sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not. So that, like I said earlier, they took people, hey, you look like you have smallpox. Okay. Are we going to just let nature take care of it? No, no, no. Get in this hot room. We'll cover you with blankets. No fresh air, no fresh water. We'll give you some mercury, and then you'll be fine. Oh, they died. Oops, they died of smallpox. Okay. All right. We have a statistics. They died of smallpox. Okay. Oh, look at this poor person. He's malnourished. He's on the edge of death. Oh, he got smallpox. Oh, he died from smallpox. Instead of actually looking at the base problems of poor health and dumb medical notions, we just do more of it. It's like, let's do that. Most of the time, and their doctors recognize that even way back in the 1800s, if we just leave it to nature, usually all these diseases are self-limiting and they fix themselves. Instead, we decide that we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to do this. And it's usually not to support your health. It's not to support your immune system or other system functions, or discovering, oh, you're vitamin D deficient. Well, when's the last time you were in the sun? Oh, 10 years ago, because I'm afraid of the sun. Well, that's probably why you're deficient. And oh, your magnesium levels are like near zero. Well, that's not going to be good. Instead of fixing those things, we just decide, well, here's a medication for this and medication for that and medication for that. Oh, wow, he's in dire straits. Put him on a ventilator. Oops, he's dead. Oh, another COVID death. Check off that box. It's how you gather statistics. It's like, oh, we have a test that shows you have some RNA fragment. That's why you died. Okay. So we check off the box, and therefore everybody's dying from COVID. I think.
So you would attribute it more to just kind of an institutional medical madness rather than kind of
I think if there was
anything.
no mass media, no one would have ever known anything happened. That was my experience. Other people had experiences where they claimed they were very sick from COVID because they had a test. But to me, I was like, I don't think nobody would have ever known. Now, there's some people that say, well, these are special lab generated viruses or something like that. Okay, that might be true. I don't know. But I think in general, if we just stay away from, get healthy and stay away from bizarre medical notions, then generally you're not going to have a big problem. And don't be afraid. Don't get scared. And the media seems to be hell bent on just scaring you all the time. Even just like local media. I know this like a long time ago. It's just your local affiliate. It's like, oh, let's talk about how many shootings there were, and there's a fire here and this was destroyed and this person's injured and da 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 da. And now it's time for sports and weather. But basically, it's generally nothing positive. It's just what disaster is happening somewhere.
Yeah,
and then
causing a lot of stress.
Yeah, it's like nonstop, death, 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 but nothing positive. And if you live in that kind of environment, that's always going to be playing on your subconscious. And then you get somebody going on, oh, we have a grave situation here. There's a new virus. It's going to kill everybody. And then they start the death count, because I saw that. I wasn't watching TV anymore. I was like, no more of that. But, you see death count, rolling death count on CNN. I was like, well, talk about self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Scare everybody to death. I knew people that didn't leave their house for 5 months. They actually stayed indoors for 5 months.
Oh dear.
It's like, I wonder what their vitamin D levels were. It's like, and there's never advice, right? So Dr. Klenner in the 50s found that vitamin C took care of polio, measles, like it was no big deal. It's like, give them extra vitamin C and the limeade and, that type of thing. Or vitamin A. If you give a high dose of vitamin A, which means you were deficient in vitamin A, 60 to 90% mortality reduction in measles.
Wow.
These types of things are in the medical literature. But when there's something that goes on, they're like, oh, they didn't get the vaccine. That's the only solution there is. And there's nothing else we can do. They don't ever advise, well, if you got a vaccine or not, look into getting more vitamin C and vitamin A and sunshine. They never tell you that. They just go, well, you didn't get a vaccine, so you're doomed. It's bizarre.
It is. Yeah.
They don't ever tell you anything.
Yeah, thank you for being on the show. It's been
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely excellent one. And I'm definitely going to pick up your companion to have a go through of all those doctors' quotes over the year that have just been swept under the rug.
It's not a reading book, right?
Just quotes, right?
There are quotes. There's a timeline, so you go through the timeline. Go these very bizarre types of things and interesting things, and then there's vaccine tragedies that I got from various newspapers. So, a nice young lady, she decides to be protected from smallpox, and they vaccinate her. She's like 16 or 17. And then, she gets tuberculosis and dies. These types of horrible stories, like on and on and on. And then there's some pictures of the back, and there's some rare documents and that type of thing. So you can just like page through and just pick out doctor's quotes, and just your head will explode because they're just like, wow. I mean, they were just so horribly critical, and those are all just like lost to history. So you can take those and write your own book or whatever. It's really fascinating, and everything's fully referenced. So every quote, every timeline event has a reference somewhere, so you can go follow up on it. So
yeah, that's always the way I found, is that when I've gone through various parts of history and found it to be completely fake, the like common view, different parts of history, that kind of thing, especially in British history, because the British Empire controlled a lot of the archives and that kind of thing, and they just burned them whenever they were too incriminating as to the behavior.
A lot of these documents are available on the internet. It's amazing what you can find if you dig. So sometimes you can't get it, so you have to get the actual physical copies. And I have some of those, photocopied. But there's a lot of stuff out there. You just could dive into the 17 1800s to start reading these books. I read one by for my environmental book that I was working on, and the whole book on the extinction of the buffalo. The guy wrote back in the 1800s. I read the whole thing. It's really interesting, the stuff you don't know when you start reading the old stuff. But it all gets all kind of massaged and homogenized into this fantasy of, in this case, top hats and parasols of England and London. Everything was just wonderful, and too bad we can't get back to those days. That kind of thing, right? Which is, it's not true. You wouldn't want to live. You wouldn't want to live in London in 1850 or so. I mean, maybe in the West End, but that wasn't all of London for sure.
Yeah, like if you read old reports from that period, like the 19th century, the bread was like 30% sawdust.
Yeah, well, right. That was the other.
That
was the other thing. During different periods of the 1800s, people were starving to death. It was like it wasn't just bad food. It was like you didn't have enough at all. And so if you're starving to death, you're susceptible to anything. Just drop dead. You're not getting any nourishment at all. So yeah. There was that. They reused sawdust, and sometimes they just ate dead animals that died. So that can't be too tasty or healthy for sure. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in history that we just forgot about.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rowan. It's been an absolutely fascinating one. Total joy.
All right, have a great day.